Summer 2015, in the suburbs of Stockholm, Sweden. And 4 childhood friends hatch an ambitious criminal plan for a group of mostly teenagers. Together, they're going to rob a foreign exchange office. You know, the kind of place tourists and immigrants exchange money. A big-time cash business, with lots of bills lying around and way less security than a bank. And a much easier target than one. This sort of armed robbery is new for the group, but there are no strangers to crime. They've grown up in Sweden's Somali community, in an area called Rinkeby, that by the 2010s is starting to develop a reputation for gangs, drugs, and violence. Violence that is starting to shock Sweden. The story starts decades earlier. In the 1960s and 1970s, Sweden undergoes a massive plan to build 1 million housing units in neighborhoods like Rinkeby for Sweden's working class. In the decades following, the country opens up its doors to immigrants needed for the labor supply, who flock to these neighborhoods. And in recent years, they've taken in large numbers of refugees and asylum seekers, many from war-torn countries, Syria, Iraq, Somalia, Afghanistan. And while there are many success stories, in some areas, especially with young men and teenagers, often second generation, integration hasn't gone well. Who and what you blame for that? Well, the left and the right point to different reasons for why that might be. But all you need to know right now is that this group of friends represent a new trend in the Swedish underworld. Something that's going to turn Sweden's streets into the most violent and dangerous in all of Europe over the next decade. Well, except for Albania, but you know how that goes. And it's all because of the proliferation of gangs from these neighborhoods. A few months earlier, the friends had teamed up and robbed the jewelry shop, using smoke bombs and firing gunshots in the air, the gun likely smuggled in from the Balkans. This plan, though, is a big step up for a group of youths looking to score big. And score big they do. They hit the foreign exchange office, it's a success, and they make off with something like $200,000 US. It's a massive score. There's just one little hiccup. One of the teens involved in the planning, he's cut out at the last minute. No heist work, no cash. Probably the biggest windfall he's ever heard of, but he's left with nothing. And he does not take this well. And he blames 20-year-old Ismail Aydin, one of the plotters, for what happens and starts to plot his revenge. It doesn't take long. That very same week, he's able to lure Ismail into a nearby forest, where he promptly guns him down, killing him. A few days later, another murder, a teenager killed, allegedly retaliation for the first murder. And so begins the gang war that defines Sweden in the late 2010s, as friends and family of these guys split into 2 gangs that will become infamous across Sweden and set the tone for the country's underworld. Death Patrol, sometimes called Death Squad, and Shottaz. Over a dozen will be dead in the coming years, likely more, as child hitmen hired through encrypted apps fire automatic rifles in broad daylight on Sweden's streets. Many will attribute Sweden's unparalleled rise in gangland violence to this split into rival factions, but many other gangs rise up during this brutal war. The gangs form alliances, cooperate on drug shipments, hire each other for hits, and sometimes merge while fighting viciously over territory, money, and respect, egging each other on over Instagram and TikTok. The Shottaz vs. Death Patrol war is going to create a fundamental shift on Sweden's streets. So much so that in 2023, Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson will take to the airwaves and address the nation saying, quote, "Sweden has never before seen anything like this. No other country in Europe is seeing anything like this." Later adding that Swedish laws aren't designed for gang wars and child soldiers. Says Diamant Salihu, an investigative journalist and author of a number of books on Sweden's gangs, quote, "We have so many child soldiers that nobody can count anymore. There are kids as young as 13 being arrested." How did one of Europe's safest, most prosperous countries descend into the real-life version of Grand Theft Auto? This is the Underworld podcast. Welcome back to the Underworld podcast, the only podcast that is worthy of your precious time every single week, where we aim to entertain and inform you by taking you our lovely listeners on a journey through the world of international organized crime. And who are we? Myself, Danny Gold, and my good mate, Sean Williams, joining us from New Zealand. We are two journalists who have reported on this stuff all over the world. Isn't that right, Sean Williams?
It is, yeah. Just yesterday I went down to the beach, saw a gang of seagulls, nick a guy's chips straight out of his hands. I mean, that counts, right? That's crime. I think that's what I do nowadays.
Could be better. As always, we have bonus episodes that are usually interviews, occasional crime news rundowns, and other things up at patreon.com/Underworld Podcast, or you can sign up on Spotify or on iTunes. If you're not signed up, what would it take to get you to sign up? We're trying to figure that out. We're thinking of doing 20-minute bonus episodes for every episode. Is that something that would work? Email us at theunderworldpodcast@gmail.com to let us know. Sean has said on record that he is willing to show feet. So if that is something you're interested in that would work as well, let us know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the fetish is for looking at a 40-year-old runner's feet, but if it makes me $5, I'm down for way more than if it makes $5. But yeah, I should probably end that.
Listen, buddy, if you can dream it up, somebody out there is willing to pay $5 a month for it, and your feet fit into that category. What else? Support our advertisers, underworldpod.com for merch, and away we go. This was a real interesting one. We probably should have done something on this 2 years ago, and Sean actually did do a prequel way back in 2021, and I had a friend of the pod, incredible researcher and Malmo resident, Hugo Come on, is that how you say his last name? Am I saying that right, Sean?
Yeah.
Do you know?
Come on.
Come on. He wrote me up like a really thorough doc on a bunch of the stuff in 2023 that I relied on heavily for this episode, but there wasn't a ton of good English language stuff besides the same sort of like news outlet articles and YouTube docs, or the sort of gangfluencer YouTube docs that you see, and we wanted to be more thorough. Luckily, Diamant Salihu, probably one of the best, if not the best reporter on the gangs in Sweden, he just published an English language book called When Nobody's Listening, which is a fantastic source, and it's one of the ones I also used to make this episode. Okay, Sweden gang wars. It's a hot topic, or maybe it was 3 years ago, but we like to be thorough here on the Underworld Podcast. I think I remember, like, even back then, newfangled YouTuber news doofus who always wears a beanie going there to investigate the quote-unquote no-go zones, but we don't like to dignify those people with acknowledgement. And while I do love a good Malmo, is that it? Malmo? Say it, Sean?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's called Malmö because it's got an umlaut on the O. But like, come on, which guy that doesn't speak Swedish is going to call it that? Malmö. Yeah.
Anyway,
sure.
I like a good Malmo as Mogadishu joke or any other war zone, but we're going to take a bit of a different approach. And to get started, that's right, Sean, we're going to go back because you see, in 1397, Sweden joins the Scandinavian Kalmar. I'm just kidding. We're not going to start there. We're going to start in like the late 80s, early 90s. That's when Sweden gets its first real taste of gang warfare.
Damn, you lampooned me. It was a simple lampoon.
I think I was lampooning. I mean, I do the same thing. I'm lampooning all of us. It's just a joke of the cliche of the genre. Because anyway, that period, the 80s and the 90s, that's when we have the international biker gangs, the Hells Angels and the Bandidos, looking to expand and get involved in the international drug trade there and other money-making rackets, and that kicks off the Great Northern Biker War, or the Nordic Biker War, or the Scandinavian Biker War, whatever you want to call it. We just did a big episode on that maybe 6 months back, so you don't even have to scroll back more than 20 seconds if you want to find that and brush up on everything. So I'm not going to do a deep dive, but what you have to know is they fought, they killed each other, and it was very violent. It's the first real taste of violence like this that the country of Sweden has, though it seems remarkably tame to what's been happening the last 10 years.
Yeah, I feel like at this point we should just tee up each episode with like a bullet point list of when we've done, I don't know, preludes or similar topics, a show number, date, unless it's one of the really old ones, because, yeah, I mean, some of the first ones, no one should listen to those. In fact, I mean, maybe we should just do 2026 reissues. Like, like we're a lazy record label saying Nigerian Cults, Arcan Redux, that'd be pretty good, right?
We could redo them because they weren't on video and they were poorly written and poorly presented with bad sound. So maybe that's what we do.
I was actually in the basement of my friend's house in Berlin, who is a Swedish house DJ and my accountant, which was the most Berlin thing ever. So yeah, I apologize to him for Malmo, but yeah, it was a very different time.
But we'll see. Maybe holiday episodes will do that. So after the biker wars, or kind of around the same time, we get the emergence of a new group of players, and that's the former Yugoslavian mafia groups. Now, in the 70s, Sweden is going through a bit of a boon, and they invite a host of foreign workers from the Socialist Republic of Yugoslavia, among other countries, to come through and work low-paying jobs for Swedes, but high-paying for them. But all this Balkan migration comes with a catch. Yugoslavia is a hotbed of crime at the time. And as Misha Glenny says in McMafia, these so-called guest worker communities, they, quote, provided the milieu in which less salubrious Yugoslav characters could take refuge and disappear from police if necessary. Which is like the journalistic, academic nerd way of saying, some bad apples slipped in too. Though, we have an immense amount of respect for Misha Glenny, who does real stuff in the field. But come on, that's like salubrious, we're here for the average Joe. Sean actually did a pretty thorough episode on this way back in 2021. Like I mentioned, I believe it's actually called Sweden Gang Wars. Think of it as the prequel of this. But yeah, you have some petty criminals and low-level mafioso types setting up shop there. And then in the 90s, as Yugoslavia falls apart, you have the emergence, as one often sees during wartime and in places with vacuums of power, sort of new states, all that, of a pretty serious organized crime group, or organized crime groups. And as the great Sean Williams writes, quote, add to that these thumped, broken nations in the former Yugoslavia, and you've got ready-baked gangs with lawlessness and easy trafficking routes at home, and a network of established, tooled-up hoods ready to go all over rich European nations.
Yeah, that's pretty well written. I mean, Misha Glenny could take a few notes from that. I wonder why that guy hasn't won an award. I don't know. It's pretty good writing.
He should win awards, for sure. He should show feet and he should win awards. Rich European nations that are wide open, with lackluster policing and an extremely lenient criminal justice system, which is still an issue decades later. Look, I'm not saying you need to be like El Salvador, but also maybe murder sentences should carry more weight than like 5 years in a studio apartment with a PS5. Yeah. But yes, the mafia is forming in the Balkans during this chaotic and anarchic period. They see Sweden as a potential home for doing crimes. So what emerges in Sweden are competitors for the motorcycle gangs in the mid-90s. And that is these Balkan organized crime groups who move into drugs and women and gambling, all the usual. And they have a steady supply of weapons from their former countries to make sure that the rules they set are abided by. And these mafias, along with the bikers, they run the underworld in Sweden in the 90s and in the 2000s. And these are like more sort of organized crime, even though, they're bikers. Older, experienced guys who want to make money. Less wild street gangs shoot first over Instagram insults. You get me? Armed robberies kind of become a thing too. They're a pretty big moneymaker for them, and there are some wild heists and some real characters. But as we start to enter the 2010s, things are changing in Sweden's crime scene. And this is when we start to see Malmo becoming code for gang violence, or referred to as Sweden Chicago. Though, in all honesty, as you hear me talk about how crazy the gang violence is there, it really does not compare to, say, the gang violence in hotbeds in the States or anywhere close to Latin America, probably even Canada either. It is, though, what we call in the news industry, the stuff in Sweden, it's man bites dog, not dog bites man. Everything is relative. I mean, you think I need to explain that phrase? Do people know what that means?
Yeah, I mean, maybe you should explain it. And while we're here, let's tell everyone what nut graph is, because I reckon they really want to know that. And while you're on that,
I can't tell.
You can tell me why editors spell out these words phonetically, like head, deck. Because I actually don't even know that myself, and I'm in the industry.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, right. So dog bites man means that like it's something that commonly happens. So like, gun violence in New York, like there's a shooting or someone gets killed, it's going to make the news, but it'll be further down because it's not something that's completely out of the ordinary. Where somewhere like Sweden, it's like man bites a dog. That's like a wild thing that's out of the ordinary. So the same exact thing happening somewhere like New York might not make the news that it would in Sweden. Although, as we're going to find out, Sweden's got crazier murders, I would say, than even New York has right now. Malmo, for those who don't know, it's a city in Sweden. It's the third largest that develops a pretty bad street gang problem around then, and a bad grenade being thrown problem. Not the least of which is because it's the gateway to Denmark, so a border town which drugs flow through. And at this time, there's new gangs emerging, and they are way more wild, more chaotic, and more violent than ever before, and they're much younger. And most of the gang members, especially the gang leaders, are either second-generation children of immigrants or immigrants themselves. And this is what causes the issue of gang violence in Sweden, not just the murders and the chaos, to become a really hot-button controversy, not just in the country, but all over Europe, and so much so that eventually it makes its way over to even American news shows and American podcaster, YouTuber culture war stuff. See, Sweden fancies itself as like a very progressive, very welcoming country. And it is, to a degree. Around this period and before, like we said, it takes in a lot of refugees and immigrants, asylum seekers from a lot of war-torn or just difficult countries. Somalia, North Africa, the Middle East. And a lot of these people, they settle in the suburbs of cities like Malmo and Stockholm, or even the university city of Uppsala.
Yeah, actually, interestingly, for a long time, Syrianska FC. It's like a top tier Swedish football team, and it was formed straight out of the Syriac community in Stockholm. With Syriacs are like Arab Christians, right? I think they're like Arab Orthodox Christians, I think. But they were formed out of that in the 70s, and they actually reached the Premier League in Sweden. So like, it's like a really big thing there. And they've fallen on hard times recently. The usual football syndrome: tried too much, ran out of cash. It's a syndrome in Stockholm, a soccer Stockholm syndrome.
It's terrible.
That was laboured.
Terrible.
That was the most laboured thing I've done in a while.
Yeah, that was awful. We're really striking out here. This is not one of our good banter episodes. I mentioned this briefly in the cold open, but between 1965 and 1974, Sweden goes on one of these incredibly ambitious public housing projects, one of the most, I think, in European history. And the goal is simple. They're going to build 1 million new apartments to eliminate housing shortages as people flood in from rural areas into cities during Sweden's industrial boom. The apartments are modern, they're affordable, and they're built quickly. I mean, you know the type, the sort of massive concrete housing blocks on the outskirts of Stockholm, Gothenburg, and Malmo, though I definitely think they were a lot nicer than your sort of like Soviet housing blocks you see in Eastern Europe. You know, there's something definitely to be done on the backfiring of well-intentioned housing projects like this. Some pretty massive gang-related stories here from like this one in Sweden. You've got Cabrini Green in Chicago, Pruitt-Igoe in St. Louis, the housing projects in like Brownsville in New York, South Bronx. I mean, I'm sure there's a ton more, but it's a pretty interesting phenomenon. But yeah, anyway, these developments, they're popular with working class and middle class Swedes. They're a great example of your Northern European welfare state successes until they're not.
Yeah, actually, shout out also to Glasgow. The Ice Cream Wars, another past show that came straight out of these like giant, poorly planned housing projects in the UK. And you know who those real crooks are, Danny? Those crooks in architecture.
Development,
Them
whatever,
and their Rolnex.
city planning, those crooks in city planning.
Yeah.
It is, so I mean, look, I don't think these things are started with bad intentions, right? They're always,
No.
the road is paved with good intentions, the road to hell. Anyway, we are.
That's actually
the road to
delivered
hell is
way
paved
better
with-
than it should be.
Was that too negative?
The road is paved with good intentions. The road to hell.
There's an old book I read that was called "Was the Road to Hell?" Oh, Michael Marin, about foreign aid in East Africa in the 90s. Great book. The Road to Hell, I think was called. Fantastic title too. I'm sure there's tons of books called The Road to Hell, but that one stuck with me. Anyway, we are going to get to gang warfare in a second. Just stick with me for a little while longer on this origin story stuff. By the 1980s and 1990s into the 2000s, Sweden begins accepting large numbers of refugees from conflict zones around the world. Chile is listed there for some reason, but I guess was there conflict in Chile in the 80s and 90s?
Yeah, I mean, there's Pinochet, right? Yeah.
Right. But 70, I thought there was 70, whatever.
He was there till the
Anyway.
90s, I think.
Yeah. Palestine, Somalia, Iran, Iraq, Syria, the former Yugoslavia. And this is like a point of national pride for the Swedes. They see themselves as this humanitarian superpower, a beacon of tolerance and generosity. And they do love to tell you this, those sanctimonious Scandinavians, as they lecture you about America. But one thing America does right, better than probably any other country in the world during that period, and I will stand by this, is integration for immigrants, while also providing them the opportunity to work or build a business. And again, obviously, I'm not saying it's easy and it's not perfect, but it was far better than most, if not all.
Yeah, Dale, you can play some patriotic music over the top of that. That was beautiful.
It's just true, dude. Like people just get integrated better here, like way better than in Europe. I mean, come on, you know that's the case.
I don't know. My cricket team was pretty good for that.
I would say Canada. I think Canada does a fairly good job.
Yeah,
of that
Canada's
as well.
great. Yeah.
But I think it's better. I think it's easier to, in terms of employment opportunities, to like start a business and make, like when I walk down my street, you know, there's like 15 people from 14 different countries with small businesses, which I think is something that's a lot harder to do in most of Europe. Maybe even in Canada, but I don't know. The Swedes, they kind of forget about the integration, or they fail at it, or their new populations don't make a good enough effort. It's probably a combination of all three. Whatever the reasoning is, these populations get isolated somewhat and have troubles with unemployment, with poverty, with social isolation, or just adapting to a new place. Now, I kind of want to make this clear that this isn't the situation of the Paris suburbs, right? Where those areas are super deprived, almost walled off, and young people for them cannot get a job anywhere. I think to some degree, the country of Sweden makes some effort to welcome immigrants, to integrate, to provide opportunity, but we can just say that it doesn't go quite as well as they hoped, and there is certainly a culture clash.
I guess in Europe, the difference is that they're explicitly brought in as guest workers, right? The Gastarbeiter in Germany. So, I mean, they're not encouraged to actually make their own businesses and stuff like they might do in the States. But yeah, I mean, Venezuelan oil politics last week and now this. I mean, we're gently leaning into actual podcasting half a decade down the line. I don't know. Where could this end?
When you say actual podcasting, do you mean the terrible sort of podcast that just kind of
the ones that make money,
button issue is? Yeah, the terrible ones that make money, they just debate whatever political issue is of the day that without understanding it. Yeah, I don't want to lean into that. But I do encourage you guys, let's see if we can juice this algorithm. Argue with each other in the comments, Keep it above board,
True.
but let's do some arguing. Let's see what happens. Maybe Sean will even chime in.
Ash's chat doesn't really do it for the algorithm on Spotify, I don't think.
Anyway, so back to where we were. What I was saying, yeah. So for sure, isolated, marginalized, questions of identity definitely don't have the same advantages Swedes do, but most immigrants don't in most countries. And as we've covered before throughout the history of America, going back to the Irish and the Italian and the Jews at the turn of the century, organized crime, gangs emerging from this sort of phenomenon, it's nothing new and it's somewhat universal. So I actually asked Hugo this, or he wrote about it in the document he sent me a couple of years ago. He is an incredible open source researcher and analyst focused on vehicle-borne IEDs, who also spent years in Malmo. I think he still lives there, or he grew up there. I'm not even sure. But he's periodically clued me in on Sweden's gang scene and actually wrote us that huge pack document a couple of years ago that I keep mentioning.
Yeah, it's great.
And he said, quote, Sweden is among the least racist countries in the entire world, and using the racism card is simply an expression of a detrimental victim mentality whereby immigrant kids are told they don't have any chance and thus give up before trying to make something of themselves. When everything is the fault of the racist structures of the state and society, the individual is automatically absolved of responsibility for their own actions. Coupled with the detrimental gangster culture whose popularity has skyrocketed in the past decade, this provides a clear path into the ranks of the gangs, because what else are they going to do when everyone has told them they don't have a chance at a normal life? Sweden, on average, spends far more on immigrant-dominated neighborhoods in terms of educational facilities, healthcare availability, etc., than on neighborhoods with majority Swedish populations, something that negates the claim that the state neglects these areas. Rooting the choice to turn to gang crime and poverty also ignores the fact that gang criminals represent a tiny minority of the people living in these areas. The overwhelming majority, despite their relative poverty, go about their lives without feeling the need to turn to crime. There are also so many success stories that discredit the connection between socioeconomic factors and criminality. Adding to that, something Diamant Salihu writes in the beginning of his book, quote, I stress the point that the criminals I speak to don't usually blame society or their parents. Rather, they tend to insist that they actively chose their lifestyle, which, I've mentioned this before, but the cool factor, right? It's a real thing. It does not get included enough in discussion about why young people join gangs, especially in the age of social media, right? The truth is, it's cool. They get girls from it, they get money from it, they get friends, and they become popular. It's a real thing that attracts kids to gangs.
Yeah, that's why I joined journalism. Which actually is a self-effacing joke because it's not true, but it actually is why I joined journalism in many ways.
Yeah, you were just misled.
Whoops.
Yeah. Whatever the case, in these neighborhoods in Sweden, things are not going well. And the first inkling of that really starts to happen around this period, 2010. The gang violence ratchets up enough that international media starts picking up on it. Writes the New York Times in 2011 about one such neighborhood, Rosengård, quote, Rosengård hardly has the look of a troubled ghetto. Lawns and playgrounds abound, but the area does not look like traditional Sweden either. Satellite dishes hang from every balcony. The bakery sells Middle Eastern confections. Al Jazeera plays on the televisions, and young men huddle on street corners casually bragging about doing battle with the police. And it continues, quote, A few years ago, the fire and ambulance brigades would not even enter Rosengard without a police escort. Youths there threw rocks and set cars on fire. Police officials say things are much better now. Fires were down 40% last year compared with 2009. But last month, 2 police vehicles parked at the station were set on fire with small homemade explosives. There's a real uptick in the violence. In 2011, a gang leader was shot dead, and by 2013, Reuters is calling Malmo, quote, Sweden Chicago. Since that first gang leader has dropped, another 8 go in a year. And again, Sweden's got a really, really low homicide rate, especially when it comes to shootings. And now over 80% of them are gang-related. So this violence starts to ramp up around that time, and Sweden also goes through these successive waves of unrest during these years. Pretty sure that I just took this out of your episode, Sean. This is your writing, which you can tell. It's terrific.
Fine.
In 2013, cops shoot a 69-year-old man dead in the Stockholm suburb of Husby. So rioters set a Stockholm police station on fire, and folks in Malmo burn up 2 squad cars. Cops are starting to warn about a gun problem even back then, too. Says a deputy commissioner, quote, "We believe it's linked to the prevalence of weapons. It is big."
Yeah, it's nice to be plagiarized in a way that might actually make me a couple of quid for a change instead of the usual insider/vice story. Anyway, yeah, I mean, is this down to the fact that there's all these weapons caches left over by the former Yugoslavian migrants? Is that where the guns are coming from, or is it something else?
Well, I don't think they're left in Sweden. You mean their caches left in Sweden? They're coming from the caches left in, like, the former Yugoslavia.
Yeah, I don't know. Kind of both, really. Like, I would assume they bought some, or yeah, I don't know.
I think there was data that showed that they're actively being smuggled in, and a lot of them are coming from Serbia, which I think makes that rifle, what's it called, the Serbian rifle, that's supposed to be...
wait, I'm going to say Makarov, but that's not. It's a pistol, isn't it?
No, I think I talk about it later down, but I also think, getting like AK knockoffs is not hard. And it's still
there
like,
must
it's
be
a lot
loads
of guns
of
for
Chinese
Sweden.
knockoffs, right, in Serbia. I can imagine that bouncing around
sure.
Yugoslavia.
And it's, it's a lot of guns for Sweden, right? But I don't think it's a lot of guns. And it's also a country of 10 million people. So how many guns do you really need to, like, heat things up? It's probably, I don't know, what, in thousands?
A few thousand. Yeah.
That's just a guess. But obviously, it's a huge difference, right? Especially when people are willing to shoot. And I think a lot of these gangs are similar to, like, low-rank gangs in the States where, like, they have a couple weapons and they trade them around, you know?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a gigantic change for the country. Sweden's supposed to be a place of safety, of prosperity, social and racial harmony, the kind of place you can leave your doors unlocked and whole families go for bike rides together through the city. Violent crime, murders, gangs. I mean, sure, you had the bikers and you had a little bit of those bank robberies, but that stuff is supposed to happen elsewhere, not in Sweden. And even with the previous iterations of Swedish gang warfare, the bikers and the Yugo mobs, the country has never seen anything like it's starting to see with the gang warfare that is now threatening to take over the city streets. And nothing really brings us home like the war that erupts in 2015 between Death Patrol and Shottaz with a Z. Both gangs are started by teenagers of Somali descent, childhood friends in the Stockholm suburbs of Rinkeby and Tensta. And that's where we get the cold open, where I went into it a bit, and Rinkeby is part of that million housing plan. According to 2011 data, residents in Rinkeby come from Iraq, Iran, Somalia, Turkey, Finland, Ethiopia, Eritrea, former Yugoslavia, Greece, Poland, Chile, Syria, China, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Morocco, and Lebanon.
Boom.
60 different ethnic groups speaking 40 different languages. So it's like Queens. It's like a neighborhood in Queens. It's actually somewhat of a success story, too. I mean, it has public libraries, green gardens with playgrounds, clean roads, good schools, and public transport, artists and musicians and families that thrive. I actually think, God, where was that based? Did you watch Snabba Cash on Netflix?
No.
Oh, great.
Good.
I think it might be based more on Foxtrot. Yeah, great like Swedish crime show about like the gangs in these housing projects. But definitely recommend it.
I mean, the neighborhoods have, the names are too nice sounding to have anything going on. Rinkeby, Husby.
I think they actually are. I mean, these aren't neighborhoods, from what I understand, they don't look like favelas or like projects in the U.S.
No,
they
still
do look
mid-century kind of big projects.
Yeah.
Like, nothing bad, yeah.
Okay. So yeah, success stories, but of course there's the other side. High unemployment for young men, poor school scores compared to the rest of Sweden, kids growing up feeling disconnected from mainstream Swedish society, or having these identity issues. And of course, the allure of the street life. Here's how the website fairplanet.org describes Rinkeby in an article titled Somali Mothers Fighting Street Crime in Sweden. I think this is from 2015 or 2016. Rinkeby is one of the residential areas that embodies the runaway crime and is seen as a reflection of Sweden's failed immigration policies. Christened the Little Mogadishu due to the large Somali population, the predominantly immigrant town with a population of about 19,000 people and where 9 out of 10 people are non-Swedish has never known peace. Drugs are trafficked openly, police cars are torched, and bombs go off randomly. Teenagers as young as 15 carry guns and wear body armor. Interestingly, the suburb hasn't had a police station since 2014, although the government has announced plans to set one up in 2019. And that's from a progressive human rights NGO based in Berlin, just to add that in.
Yeah, it does sound quite a lot like Mogadishu, to be fair.
I think it's, like I said, it's a man bites dog situation, right? Compared to what it was.
Yeah.
So yeah, the lore of the street, and that's sort of how that crew from our cold open gets started. Petty drug dealers and thieves pushing dimes on the corners and whatnot, but they want more. So first they start off robbing the jewelry store, the smash and grab in the mall, and then on the morning of July 22nd, 2015, they hit the foreign exchange. The robbery is successful, but the partnership goes sideways, and so begins the infamous gang war that pretty much births both these notorious gangs. The friend groups, the relatives, they fracture and they take sides. On the one side, Shottaz, and on the other side, Death Patrol, which also goes by 3MST. These are loose gangs full of teenagers without a strong hierarchy, but they're vicious. They have no issues killing each other. In fact, Death Patrol eventually becomes known for contract killings, charging tens of thousands of dollars a hit, and that's going to become a big issue in Sweden, especially when encrypted apps hit the scene around 2017 and people can get hired anonymously. More on that later, because that gets really crazy. The next few years, 2015, 2016, 2017, there's tit-for-tat attacks, bombings, shootings, all that, and it's not even the only gang war going on in Sweden. Then in the winter of 2017 into 2018, things get brutal. Now, I don't know if this is the first example of this, but it's one that's often pointed to as like the exclamation point for when this tactic takes off. In January of 2018, a Death Patrol hitman walks into a pizzeria in broad daylight in Rinkeby and executes a Shottaz member, shooting him in the head point blank.
Yeah, that is an insane step up. It's coming back to me now, like the 2021 show that I did as well. I think I led with there's like a crazy killing in a barbershop in broad daylight. I think like hail of bullets, 2 p.m., like tons of people around. It's like insane stuff out of nowhere, the kind of violence, yeah.
Yeah, but here's the thing that sets the tone for the next decade or so of gangland assassinations in Sweden. The shooter is 16 years old. He's soon caught, but because of Sweden's super lenient criminal justice system, especially when it comes to people under 18, he's given only 3 years. And those 3 years are to be served in a youth facility. And this whole thing, it's a calculated thing by Death Patrol. They are aware of how low the penalties are for teenagers in Sweden, even for murder. See, in Sweden, murder suspects under 15 cannot be arrested by police. Social services handle them. And if they're between 15 and 18, they cannot be sentenced to adult prison. Instead, the harshest sentence they can expect is 3 years of youth confinement, where they're allowed phones, computers, and other luxuries for shooting and killing another person, regardless of how brutal the act is.
Yeah, this does seem like something gang leaders could maybe exploit for nefarious means, but I don't want to give away any spoilers.
Yeah. In fact, murder charges in general only carry between 14 and 18 years of prison, which ends up being 9 to 12 years behind bars with early release on good behavior. And you may have heard about some shooters getting life imprisonment, but that only means that you're not eligible for parole until after 10 years served. In fact, there's a case where a 17-year-old killed a cop. I think that was in 2021, and he only got 8 years. And that was an extraordinary case where anything below the already extremely lax sentence would have been viewed as even more of a slap in the face to police. Now, add into this that cops in Sweden are particularly understaffed. They get pretty low pay, and they're really hamstrung in terms of surveillance and monitoring even known gangsters because of super strict privacy laws in Sweden that make it extremely hard to take down these gangs. There's no RICO laws here whatsoever.
Super interesting. I'd have assumed also that base pay for a public worker in Sweden was like 100 grand or something. I didn't even know there were underpaid people in Scandinavia. That's interesting.
I think I looked it up, and cops average like $5 grand a month.
Jeez.
But I could be
not a cheap country.
Stockholm's expensive too, right?
Yeah, it's insanely expensive, yeah.
More so than New York?
No.
Yeah, you learned a lesson last week.
Keep on enjoying. Yeah, I did.
Especially at those clubs we were going to.
Well, no comment, but there are ways to spend your money that are better. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Also, one thing left out of a lot of convos around 2011, Sweden's Supreme Court changes some rules when it comes to prosecuting drug trafficking and dealing, which makes sentencing possibly way more lenient. Judges are given a bit more wiggle room to consider extenuating circumstances like first-time offenders, young people, or those in minor roles. And that means more people caught are getting fines, probation, or community sentences instead of prison. It gives lower-level gang members a chance to avoid jail, lessens their punishments, and provides a crack in the system or an opportunity for the street networks and gangs to survive and grow and exploit. Now, all this has been widely debated in Sweden right now, and I think the past 2 or 3 or 4 years even, at this moment in 2025. But this was certainly the case back then for sure. I don't think it's really changed. Though there's a lot of debates about moving the age, I think, the 15 thing to 13. So I think there's a lot of that going on, but we'll get to that next episode when I catch us up. And the gangs, they're not idiots, right? They figure all this out. So what they do is they start hiring and sending teenagers to do their hits. We're talking 13, 14, 15, 16-year-olds becoming Sweden's gangland sicarios. And that's what Salihu means when he talks about an epidemic of child soldiers that I mentioned earlier. So Death Patrol and Shottaz, they release a wave of these child hitmen for bombings, shootings, hits, all that. Do we go into the bombings already? I think, you know what? I'll get to that later on too. Sorry, I'm pushing a lot back. There's just a lot to cover here, and we have 2 episodes to get through it.
Yeah, interesting sidebar as well. Like both sort of 6 out of 10 gang names. Nothing special. Could try harder, but I guess when you're in Sweden, I mean, their most famous band ever is just the first letters of the people's names, right? So the bar's pretty low. Are there any other Swedish bands like the Hives? Not great name. The Cardigans, average. I mean, I'm showing my age here. Are there any like up to date Swedish bands that you've heard of?
Are the Cardigans the one who did Love Fool?
Yes.
Great song.
In what, the
Fantastic
late 90s?
Yeah, it was in the Romeo and Juliet movie. Baz Luhrmann's incredible movie,
man.
Fantastic song. I had something about Sweden gangs to say. Oh, actually, I think Death Patrol's a pretty solid name, but I think Shottaz with a Z at the end is like a. I mean, come on, buddy.
Yeah, that's it's juvenile, 14? Man. That's what that is.
Yeah. Over the next few years, there's close to a dozen back to the murders. Over the next few years, there's close to a dozen murders committed in the war between Shottaz and Death Patrol. Swedish police eventually identify 4 leaders of Death Patrol in 2019. They're all eventually caught and given long sentences, but the wars continue. In 2020, it even spreads to Denmark when 5 members of Death Patrol, which are basically a hit squad, including 2 under 18, travel to Copenhagen to take out 2 members of Shottaz who had fled there for their safety. They commit a double murder, they take the 2 out, which royally pisses off the Danes. And this is a big thing now too. We'll get to the more international angle when we dive into the war between the Kurdish fox and Strawberry next episode, the internal foxtrot war. But in Scandinavia, the other countries like Denmark, Finland, they're starting to get super pissed off at Sweden for its lax enforcement and inability to curb the gang wars that start spreading to their neighbors, and sort of Sweden's homegrown gangs are expanding their territory into countries like Finland and Denmark.
Yeah, it might be worth pointing out now that if you don't know, Malmö, whatever, and Copenhagen, they're basically like twin cities, right? They're separated by 8 miles of sea and a bridge in the middle, hence the show The Bridge, which was really good.
I didn't see it.
They're almost the same place.
They redid it for Juarez and El Paso, I think, in the States.
Yeah.
Right? The central plot, there's like a murder and the body's found on the bridge. I never watched the States one, though, or maybe I tried to and I didn't love it.
I didn't watch it, but I've heard good stuff about it, actually. But it's, they're like, I don't...
The Swedish Denmark
like,
one is good?
Yeah, Scandi Noir thing. Yeah, it's pretty good. But it's like, I don't know, we were talking about that jurisdictional thing between like, Alabama and Mississippi or whatever it was a few weeks ago. Yeah. I mean, how does it work with these guys in?
Well, that's why they made a show about it.
Correct.
I think the Danes, if the Danes catch them in their territory, it's Danish justice, which, they do catch them. And Denmark actually has learned its lesson from the biker wars of the 80s and 90s, so their criminal justice system does not play around. They're not as lenient. The Danish court determined that the double murder is part of that gang conflict between Death Patrol and Shottaz, which means they can use special gang legislation for the trial. So the 5, they get heavy sentences, including life imprisonment for some, which I believe is a bit more serious in Denmark than in Sweden. The Danes also ratchet up their border patrol for the first time in a long time on that bridge, trying to keep the Swedish gang wars from further spilling over. One of the people identified as the leader of Death Patrol who was caught in this is named Muhammad Ali, who goes by Makaleli. Who is that, Sean? He's a soccer player, right?
Yeah, Claude Makelele.
Did I
He's
say it
like
right?
he defined the position that I now play in, which is defensive midfield. He played for Chelsea, Real Madrid. He was incredible, and apparently incredible in the showers as well. But yeah, this guy, I looked him up. He
I'm
doesn't look
sorry.
like Makelele at all. He's like someone stretched him out and vacuum packed him. So I don't know, not
Anyway.
very good.
Anyway, that guy makes headlines a few years ago when he tries to renounce his Swedish citizenship and get the Danes to deport him to Somalia instead of Sweden.
What?
But they do not go for it. And I doubt Somali prisons have PS5s or whatever they get in Sweden, but they probably are a lot easier to bribe your way out of.
I mean, I've actually been inside a Somali prison. I think I'd take my chances with the Swedes, to be honest.
Maybe, I mean, I assume he was fearing
It's only a
there'd be
PS3.
attacks on him or something like that. But okay. Besides all the murdering, though, these gangs, they make their money from drugs, and the market for drugs has exploded in Sweden and the region in recent years. Sweden's got a great location to pump into the rest of Scandinavia, a relatively wealthy population, and, like I said, lax enforcement on drug dealing, making it a pretty attractive market. And they like to party. And these gangs now have connections to get a purer, larger supply, whether it's in the Balkans, Netherlands are big, Morocco, Spain. There's big money to be made here. Now, around the time that trial is playing out in Denmark in 2020, 2021, there's yet another murder that absolutely shocks Sweden. And the reason it shocks Sweden is not just because it's another 19-year-old gunned down, but because the teenager who was murdered is one of the country's biggest music stars, a rapper named Einar, who had set streaming records for Sweden and won awards. He was, essentially, the biggest rap star in Sweden at the time of his murder. So Swedish gangster rap, becomes a thing in the 2010s, and much like you find in recent years with the drill scene in Chicago and the Bronx and Brooklyn, many of these rappers are either tied in with gangs or gang members themselves. I actually thought all the Swedish rappers were gonna be like drill rappers themselves or drill guys, but I listened to a few of their songs and they kind of mostly sound like Drake and Juice WRLD knockoffs, but some of it is catchy, I'm not gonna lie. The songs and the Instagram accounts, they become fodder for the gang gossip blogs. They're used for recruitment, they're calling out enemies, they're starting beef. It's a familiar pattern, except with Sweden, I kind of feel like maybe there's a level of ineptitude with the police where you don't see that in Chicago or New York, like they're on it. That's my personal opinion. But I think it bears out. Says Hugo, quote, "The fact is that the majority of notable gangster rappers in Sweden are connected to a gang in some way or another, often functioning as a propaganda arm of their respective gang."
Yeah, this is like, wasn't this similar to the kind of thing you were talking about in Marseille as well, right? It was like all linked in, gangs, music. Like there's a lot of that mixing going on, slinging.
I think they're actually members though, whereas like, back in the day in New York and LA, I feel like in the 80s and 90s, the gangster rappers were not so much gangsters themselves, but like getting extorted by gangsters.
Yeah.
That was like a big thing, but in Sweden, it sounds like they're actually, they're also just little kids running around with guns, but you get it. So yeah, you get the social media pages and the message boards too. They treat these gang members like celebrities, gang wars like sports teams, and they even start using the term gangfluencer in Sweden around 2021. I think it becomes like a something with like the Swedish language association, whatever you want to call it. So Einar, this guy, he grows up in Stockholm. I've seen some stuff say he grew up in like a nice area. Others say he was in trouble as a young guy and lived in a Swedish group home or the Swedish version of a group home. But he is involved somewhat in street life or just kind of cultivates that image. He pals around with some other prominent gangster rappers in Sweden, like a guy named Yasin Bin, who by all accounts is heavily involved with Shottaz. By 2019, after like a year or two of being active, he's 16 years old and arguably the biggest pop star in Sweden. He releases his debut album, Första Class, and it's a massive success. His single, Katten I Trakten, tops the Swedish charts in 2019, and he becomes Sweden's most streamed artist on Spotify that year. More than ABBA, more than the Cardigans, more than the Hives. In 2020, is Swedish House Mafia actually, they're not Swedish, right?
I think they are.
Are they?
Right? Maybe.
I thought they were like
I know
a bunch of guys from Long
Club,
Island.
and they were good. They were Swedish, actually, which means Fight Club in Swedish.
Anyway, Einar,
number
number 1, 2019. In 2020, he wins Newcomer of the Year and Hip Hop Act of the Year at Sweden's versions of the Grammys. So this kid, he is a star.
Yeah, I looked up what Katten I Trakten means, and apparently it's like neighborhood cat. or like a household cat or something. I mean, he's
sure the
rapping in
slang-
Swedish, right? It's not in English, so
Yeah.
integration pretty good.
It's catchy. No, but
Yeah.
he's Swedish. He's like a Swedish kid. Like he's not the kid of immigrants. He's like a Sweden kid.
He's like a white Swedish kid.
Yeah. And he falls into some traps because in May of 2020, when he's only 17 years old, he's kidnapped. One of the prominent gangs, the Varby network, that's the thing, the gangs in Sweden are called networks a lot. They want to kidnap him outside of a studio, but they fail. But 2 weeks later, they succeed. Einar is actually set up by two prominent rapper buddies, Yasin, who we mentioned earlier, and another famous gangster rapper named Haval Khalil. They tell him to come to the studio to do a collab, and then he's just grabbed up. They take him somewhere, they rob him of his jewelry, they beat him, and they make him dress up in women's underwear, where they take a video of it to use as blackmail, threatening to expose him and destroy his street cred unless he pays them $300,000. He's held for hours. He refuses to pay the extortion fee. I think that actually happens too after he's let go. The extortion attempt. They also plant a bomb outside his house, and he still refuses to pay.
Yeah, I mean, in Berlin, this is considered foreplay. You pay for this in Berlin.
Beating someone and making them wear women's underwear? Not
yeah,
the bomb, right?
but the stuff as well. I don't know. All of it.
So, there's multiple reports that say who did this. Some say it's the Gangland network, which plays a central role in next week's episode. They were involved in the kidnapping. The Gangland stuff in Sweden, it seems like relatively loose, like I keep mentioning. Like a lot of these guys seem to move around different gangs, work together, fight each other, shift, break alliances, all that. The kidnapping of Einar, it does start a cycle of diss tracks and threats between him and his enemies. It's all over YouTube. It's all over Instagram. You know the drill. In April the following year, Haval, that other rapper, his brother is shot and killed in what some people believe is retaliation for the kidnapping. Soon after, both Yasin and Haval are sentenced to prison for their involvement in the kidnapping. Yasin gets, I think, a few months, and Haval Khalil gets 2.5 years. Einar, though, around this time, I think it's 2021, he's still being targeted, right? In more incidents. There's shootings near him, threats against him and his family. His mother speaks out publicly about how she fears he's going to get killed. His friends are telling him he should leave Sweden or at least disappear for a while. The Swedish police later reveal they had intelligence suggesting that there was an active plot to harm him, involving multiple individuals across different criminal networks. So like I said, a bunch of different gangs. But Swedish law enforcement, again, operating in a country where they have these strong privacy protections and limited surveillance capabilities compared to other countries, struggle to prevent what's obviously coming. In early October 2021, he's arrested after being involved in a stabbing, and the week after that, he's scheduled to testify in an appeal hearing about his own kidnapping. He's actually refused to testify at the initial trial. He was very public about not wanting to participate in the appeal either, but he never actually makes it to court because on October 21st, 2021, he shot and killed in an upscale Stockholm neighborhood, instantly becoming one of Sweden's most notorious murders. It's clear from the start he was tracked and targeted, and most speculation points to the Shottaz. Quote, "We heard pom pom pom," said Dumbly, a rapper who was with him who was also a convicted rapist and member of the street gang Death Patrol, and later, I believe, might have been suspected of being involved in setting up Einar.
This is like completely off topic. Well, it's not completely off topic. There's that pom 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 thing is interesting how different languages say stuff for different sounds. Like, did you know that in Germany they think a chicken says kikirikiriki instead of like cock-a-doodle-doo? I can't remember what they say for a dog's woof, but it's not woof either. It's like completely different.
Everyone in the last few episodes who was like, we really like the banter is going to just be like, actually, we changed our mind after this episode.
Oh, wow, wow. That's what they say. Wow, wow. That's it.
That's what
anyway, people are in here for that. I don't even know what that is as a subject, but I hope you enjoy our show.
According to Diamant Salihu, quote, "Several rappers connected to different criminal gangs have support from their respective gang, since they oftentimes have grown up together with the gang members. Einar moved between multiple different groupings and didn't have the same support, which made him more vulnerable. But even with Einar dead and the other rappers locked up, this feud continues to play out, especially since the gangs all fracture into smaller groups. A gang member who was with Einar at the time of his murder, and like I said, is suspected of leaking his location to the killers for a cut, was himself shot and killed outside his mother's apartment on Christmas Day 2022. The suspected shooter also had an IED detonated at the entrance to the apartment complex where he's listed."
Yeah, so we're kind of moving from gang fight into urban warfare? IEDs?
Yeah, the ID thing is interesting, right? It's another interesting facet of the Swedish underworld. They love to blow things up. Homemade IEDs, stolen dynamite, copious amounts of grenades brought from the Balkans. It's like a daily part of life in some neighborhoods now. In 2024, there's 317 bombings in Sweden, one a day pretty much. Sweden now has more grenade attacks per capita than any country in Europe not actively at war. And I think, in fact, according to Swedish criminologists, the only other country that even tracks hand grenade explosions like Sweden does is Mexico. And you guys know how that goes. There's even like a if you see something, say something campaign there. According to Hugo, most of the bombings take place in the cities and they're usually set off at night. And they're usually not intended to kill someone, right? They're used for intimidation and coercion, usually to let a target know that they can be gotten. That's why so many occur at the main entrances of apartment complexes where gang members live. They also target the homes of family members, of gang members, or businesses and people that are being extorted, which is another way the gangs make money, and they're starting to do that a lot more. They're moving into the old school mafia stuff. Extortion rackets, right? Going after small businesses or restaurants, nightclubs that are owned by rival gang members, but a lot of like barbershops, car washes, gyms, arcades, the sort of kiosks they have in Europe. They'll get this demand for protection money. My assumption too is that a lot of them are immigrant owned or probably from the same community, because that's just how it works with organized crime, right? So they'll turn down the protection money at first, they get bombed. Just the classic mafia tactics. And the guns though too, there are a lot of them for Europe. In January 2021, the Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime released a report that claims most of the guns come from Serbian guns that traffic through family outfits and biker gangs. Most of them come across the bridge from Copenhagen. Hand grenades sell for just $12, and a third of all illegal handguns on Swedish streets are Serbian Zastravas. How do you say it, Sean?
Yeah, perfect. I don't know. Serbo-Croat's not my forte. But I mean, that $12 thing is nuts for a grenade. I mean, I read some bad sources online, and apparently it costs between $50 and $100 to get a frag grenade on the black market in the US, which
there's no way that's true. It's probably like 20 times that much.
You reckon?
You're not getting a grenade for. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Dude, you're not getting a grenade for cheap here. Continues an OCCR.
Waste of money. God.
I mean, I assume I've never had to purchase a grenade, but I don't think I know anyone who has on the black market.
Do you know?
Guns, yes, but not. So I assume the prices are quite high. Continues an OCCRP story, quote, groups receiving arms from these traffickers include Swedish biker gangs and family-based drug syndicates. Others include youth gangs among Sweden's Somali diaspora, as well as a notorious group of loan sharks that has exploited its own community of Orthodox Christian immigrants from the Middle East for decades. That might be your Syriacs right there, but I'm not sure. So
sounds right.
I don't want to rush to judgment. But back to the violence. Einar isn't the only prominent Swedish rapper to be gunned down. In 2024, another successful rapper named C. Gambino was shot dead in a parking garage weeks after winning a prestigious Grammy Award. That's the Swedish Grammy Award.
Yeah, that's a pretty harsh sentence for plagiarism. Childish Gambino is a Swedish gangster? What the hell?
I think he just C. Gambino, who knows? Another rapper, Gaboro, I think he was Syrian. He was gunned down in a parking lot as well later that year, and it was all over social media. In 2023, a teenage rapper named Aduli was gunned down at a sports pitch while children were training nearby. And in 2019, rapper Rose Shamal was murdered while walking his dog. His brother had been killed the year before. But yeah, back to Death Patrol and the Shottaz. Death Patrol fractures, but an element of it continues to this day. Their operations aren't limited to Sweden. The gang has expanded into Finland, Denmark, and Morocco, smuggling cocaine and hashish from Spain and Morocco into the Nordic region. Finnish authorities broke up a major Death Patrol drug operation in 2023, seizing over 350 kilos of drugs and 250,000 euros in cash. So 350 kilos is not a small amount. The investigation revealed that the gang was systematically bringing drugs through Sweden into Finland, where they would be sold to street gangs in major cities. And these gangs, too, the reason they're so impactful is they kind of serve as the inspiration for other young men and teens in Sweden hoping to live that life, right? It really is like a social contagion, this sort of stuff. Always has been, like I said, but when you factor in social media, too, you have a lot of other gangs sort of springing up, right? The Bro Network, the Dahlen Network, the Norsburg Network, Tensta Network, Husby Network, 24K, and as we're going to hear, Foxtrot, and then the Roomba Network. They all fight over territory. They recruit teenagers. They send out hits while trying to make cash from the drug game. By the 2020s, cops in Sweden estimate there's 200 or so gangs like them in Sweden and 62,000 people connected to the life or involved in some capacity, which is out of a population of 10.6 million in the entire country.
That's nuts, man. I mean, I guess like you kind of like gone over this a little bit, but the key's in the fact they're shipping to Finland, right? That there's such a market for these guys. Like Malmo is right next to Copenhagen, which is right near northern Germany. You got Hamburg, the port there, Bremerhaven. And then it's a transshipment point from the Netherlands and Germany into Scandinavia. I guess my only question is why the Danes haven't been so successful on that. Then why it's left to the Swedes. But I guess, I don't know, better policing maybe. The sort of experience of the biker wars has made them crack down a lot harder over there.
I think they've cracked down hard for sure on homegrown gangs there, and I think that it's easier for the Swedes because they can go in and out. But they definitely, I don't know if they actually control the drug trade in Copenhagen. I know they've tried to expand, but like we said, they got caught. Like Denmark also has its own biker gang situation there too as well, and I'm sure some of these gangs too. You know, probably their own iteration. So the gang that really takes Sweden's underworld to the next level, that shocks the country even more and changes everything, and actually stretches across the world to Turkey, Iraq, Dubai, and even gets involved with the Iranian Revolutionary Guard and gets sanctioned by the US as a terrorist organization. And that gang is Foxtrot and led by the Kurdish Fox and is second in command and now deadly rival Strawberry. And that story is going to be told in the next episode because we are out of time.
Wow. But it gets crazier.
It gets so much crazier. But yeah, patreon.com/Underworld podcast, bonus episodes, everything else you want there, underworldpod.com for merch, the Underworld podcast at gmail.com. Let us know what you guys want to see and hear and how we can convince you to give us more money. That's
maybe
all.
Pithy outros, yeah?
This fucking guy.